In this video, we're going to take a look at Daniel chapter 1. And so we'll begin here, first of all, by highlighting a few things from Daniel 1, 1 through 8. So I'll read the text first. So this is from the New Revised Standard Version. So in the third year of the reign of King Jehoiakim of Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord gave King Jehoiakim of Judah into his power, as well as some of the vessels of the house of God. These he brought to the land of Shinar, and he placed the vessels in the treasury of his gods. Then the king commanded his palace messenger, Ashpenaz, to bring some of the Israelites of the royal family and of the nobility, young men without physical defect and handsome, versed in every branch of wisdom, endowed with knowledge and insight, and competent to serve in the king's palace. They were to be taught the literature and language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the royal rations of food and wine. They were to be educated for 3 years, so that at the end of that time they could be stationed in the king's court. Among them was Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, from the tribe of Judah. The palace master gave them other names. Daniel he called Belshazzar. Hananiah he called Shadrach. Mishael he called Meshach. And Azariah he called Abednego. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the royal rations of food and wine. So he asked the palace master to allow him not to defile himself. So we'll stop there and highlight just a couple of things from these few verses. So the first thing we kind of want to note here about this is we're told that God let Nebuchadnezzar plunder the temple. Now the setting is the reign of Jehoiakim. So Jehoiakim's reign is from 609 to 598 BCE. The actual date of the fall of Jerusalem is 586. So you can see that it's a little bit of a time between 598 and 586. So one of the things to remember about the author of Daniel is that he frequently employs what some scholars calls telescoping historical events. In other words, he takes periods of time and he will compress them together. So they may not happen at exactly the same time, but they are happening in approximately the same time. So if you kind of imagine a telescope kind of turned backwards, as it were, a large amount of time is kind of narrowed in into a particular period. So the author appears to be recalling the story of Babel in Genesis 11, 1 through 19, as he begins to kind of explain some of the things that are going on in here. And so the story of Babel, of course, is this one that sought kind of arrogance towards God by building temples. And so there's something here that's going on that is reminiscent of that particular story here in this story. So Daniel and his friends are brought into the king's palace. So Daniel 1, 3 through 8. And Daniel accepts his foreign name, but not food or wine that will defile him. But it's a bit curious as to really why would this food in particular defile him? I mean, is there something about this food? Is it, non-kosher foods that he is being offered? Is it because these foods and wines would have been as a part of any foods that are offered to the gods and then eaten or consumed by other people? And so does it connect him with idolatry in some way? So accepting his name is a way of accommodating into his new situations. So it's not wrong that Daniel takes on this new name, but it could be seen as wrong or violating his relationship to the covenant if he eats this food or wine, which may defile him because somehow or another this food and wine are associated with idolatry, or, if there's somehow or another of not kosher. So one of the things about this is Daniel watching out for how he will be defined. So he doesn't want to be defined as someone who adopts or accepts the the standards, the values, the idolatry of those who are in charge, those who have power. And so, in this sense, not wanting to eat this food because of what it may do to him in terms of his relationship with God, we may see Daniel here as an example of imperial resistance. In other words, there are certain things about his new overlords or the new powers that he will accept, and there are other things that he will not accept. And so Daniel might become a model, as it were, for future generations who have to live either under an imperial power or for those who might actually have to serve in an imperial power. That there are certain things you can do, accepting new names, so non kind of Hebraic names or non-Semitic names to ones that are more accustomed for the new ruling power. But there are other things that one has to draw a line on. One cannot do things that would violate key or core practices that help to define one as a faithful Jew or a faithful Israelite or a member of the covenant people of God. All right, we'll jump now to Daniel 9 through 21. And now God granted Daniel favor and compassion from the palace master. The palace master said to Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king. He has appointed your food and your drink. If he should see you in poorer condition than the other young men of your age, you will endanger my head with the king. Then Daniel asked the guard, whom the palace master had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. You can then compare our appearance with the appearance of the young men who eat the royal rations and deal with your servants according to what you observe. So he agreed to this proposal and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, it was observed that they appeared better and fatter than all the young men who had been eating the royal rations. So the guard continued to withdraw their royal rations and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and skill in every aspect of literature and wisdom. Daniel also had insight into all visions and dreams. At the end of the time that the king had set for them to be brought in, the palace master brought them into the presence of Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them. Among them all, no one was found to compare with Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore, they were stationed in the king's court, in every matter of wisdom and understanding concerning which the king inquired of them. He found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. And Daniel continued there until the first year of King Cyrus. So a few things here about these verses. So even in exile, God is directing Daniel's experience. So just because Daniel is in exile, just because he is serving in a foreign court, doesn't mean that God has abandoned him. God doesn't abandon his people, even though he has them as part of the punishment of the whole people living under this imperial rule. So Daniel's experience has parallels with Josephus' captivity in Genesis 37, 39 through 44, where Josephus is someone who excels in interpreting visions, interpreting dreams. He works within an imperial court or works under foreigners, and he's able to excel. He's handsome, and Daniel is handsome. So there are these parallels between the two. So what does this episode imply theologically about how God works in and through some human actions? So here we have where this decision is made to stay faithful and loyal, and because he and his friends are going to demonstrate their loyalty to God by not defiling themselves with the king's rations, then God blesses them. So it seems like when an Israelites or when God's covenant people demonstrate loyalty, then they can be blessed, even though they are not freed from their enslavement or being captured or being in the service of these imperial courts. There are other ways in which they can excel while they are in that service. So, big question then is, how does one gain the wisdom and knowledge of God's plans? So, wisdom here in Daniel will refer to not only in the broader sense what wisdom might have been thought of as being able to interpret the stars, interpret the signs, but in particularly, wisdom is understood as knowing what God is really about, what God is doing. And this wisdom and this knowledge doesn't come because one um, applies themselves to acquire it. It is because God grants it, God gives it to them. So wisdom and knowledge comes to those who demonstrate loyalty to the covenant. So Daniel is an example here of what could be referred to as a maskalim. So these are people of discernment. So he is demonstrating a discernment, an ability to read things, to interpret things, and how those things demonstrate an understanding of what God's plans are. So the wise are going to outlast the powers. What we see is Daniel is basically going to continue on in this position until the first year of King Cyrus. So in other words, after the Babylonians are destroyed and you're getting this Medo-Persian empire that comes along, Daniel is still there. While there are other powerful rulers who present themselves maybe as wise and as endowed with abilities by the gods. Here's Daniel who is going to demonstrate that, and that's because Daniel is loyal. So one outlasts the threats that are there if one practices this discernment. Daniel and his friends excel because they do not succumb then to what the king offered them or what future kings will offer them. So faithful resistance to the powers, these imperial powers, empire powers, those are going to be rewarded. So the book of Daniel here is working kind of as an encouragement to others who might see themselves as wise or seek God's wisdom or seek knowledge, that if you want that knowledge to be granted to you, then you need to show resistance to what the powers might want to do, how they might want to co-opt you. So it is until the first year of King Cyrus, so that's 539 BCE. So in other words, the end of the Babylonian captivity, in the beginning, in the start of the return from exile of many Jews. So during all of this time, Daniel is someone who is going to demonstrate faithfulness to God while serving in a foreign power. Now, Jews who are going to be allowed to return back to Judea, they're going to be in a similar situation where they are going to continue to be under powers, under rulers. They're going to have to navigate how they live under those powers. There are some things that those powers are going to ask of them or demand of them, require of them to show loyalty, which they can do. It's acceptable. It's okay. You're not violating the covenant when you do so. But there may be other areas in which those powers are requiring or demanding which you cannot. So we're not thinking here primarily, since Daniel final compilation, since while these narratives may have existed before final compilation, before the final composure of the book, the final composure of the book is taking place somewhere during the time when Jews are living under Seleucid control. So during the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes is going to push Jews to become disloyal, to abandon their covenant faith. And so here's where Jews are going to have to practice resistance to that demand. So they're going to need to understand what God is doing in the world. They're going to need to have wisdom. They're going to need to be guided by those who have wisdom. There may be some things that Seleucid powers might require. That's okay. Certainly even the change of names. But there are other things that particularly Antiochus is going to require that are no longer acceptable. So the line has to be drawn, and Jews are going to have to resist what Antiochus demands. So that gives a kind of an overview of Daniel chapter 1. and how the story might function in its kind of historical context.